Teenage girls have been at the apex of societal mockery pretty much since society was a thing. Women of almost any age are generally prone to being perceived as less than from their male counterparts by people who view the world through a prism of gender binaries. But there seems to be special malice towards teenage girls. Everything they like is devalued, and they themselves are considered to be stupid, naive, and gullible, while at the same time, they're sexualized and objectified to the point of depersonalization. Any assertion of identity and femininity is branded as immoral in a male dominated society, and no girl is too young to receive this label. There's this perception of girls and young women to be wicked and evil because of the power they supposedly wield over other people, and over men especially, through their youth and beauty. An expectation to uphold morality and traditional values are thrust upon women without their permission or even knowledge. So when they stray from their prescribed path, it's recognized as a corruption of their virtue. It can be scary to be transitioning into womanhood. You're thrust into a world where adults don't trust you anymore. To paraphrase Katie Heron, femininity becomes a terrifying minefield to navigate when society regards you as an adult and treats you like one, even though you feel like you're still a child inside. Adolescence is so difficult because you now have new expectations to live up to and a new set of rules to follow. You often have no time to process what you're feeling inside because you're so overwhelmed trying to keep up with external changes. It's a phase of feeling powerless and malleable and suffocated from all the things left unspoken. You can feel like your choices are being taken away from you and you're struggling to reform your identity while you grapple with the effect that society's perception of you has on your psyche. You can feel like you're stuck in a narrative that's building to something happening to you without making an informed choice about it. Your own tale of horror. The Witch is a 2015 debut film of director and writer Robert Eggers. It stars everyone's favorite dear human hybrid Anya Taylor-Joy, Harvey Scrimshaw, Office alumni Ralph Ineson, Moon Door enjoyer Kate Dickie, and the breakout star of the movie Black Phillip. The film centers around a Puritan family in 1630s New England who have been excommunicated from their congregation and plantation and are thereafter struggling to survive in the wilderness of the New World. The plot is a twisted reinterpretation of the hero's journey through the protagonist, Thomasin. She's the eldest child of the family, who have been battling the elements of wilderness to colonize the land and flourish on their farm. They encounter a great tragedy when the youngest child, unbaptized baby Samuel, gets taken without word or warning. The events from there on escalate into a further series of tragedies that tear Thomasin apart from her family at a time when she needs love and support the most. The Witch harkens back to the classic bedtime stories told to children to keep them from misbehaving. The film is framed as an adaptation of a folk tale, and the eerie atmosphere of the movie through the lighting and the cinematography helps to bring credibility to that claim. It has all the hallmarks of folk tales: a woebegone protagonist, a creepy witch that steals babies and lives in the woods, hazy rules about how things work with regards to magic and the supernatural, and animals that you shouldn't trust. It even has elements from the superstitions of colonial New England and Puritan theology. It's not easy to pin down what's so deliciously disturbing about the witch. It's unnerving, uncomfortable, and unflinching in its approach to portraying the repression and psychological chaos that Thomasin goes through. The Witch is, for all intents and purposes, a horror movie where you're guessing who the main antagonist truly is. You're rooting for Thomasin the same way that you would root for a final girl, where she's granted salvation after a confrontation with her tormentor. It can definitely qualify as a contender for the top spot in the Good for Her cinematic universe, and it's a pretty good companion piece to, say, Teeth or Jennifer's Body, or what I consider its spiritual predecessor, Carrie. There isn't any projectile vomiting, sadly, but it has a bunch of other top-tier stuff. Witches in animal form, the devil in animal form, disease and rot, kidnapping, kidnapping, murder, violence, religious mania and extremism, hysterical sobbing. It's pretty great. There's no menstrual blood, body horror of any kind, but it has scary bunnies, so there's something for everyone. With modern cinematic tropes contextualizing horror to a paint-by-number exercise of predictability, The Witch has to fight for its place in the pantheon of horror cinema, but it belongs there. Whether you consider it elevated horror or not, it is absolutely a horror movie. It's driven not by plot or story, but rather through the emotions of the family, and chooses to keep the viewer stewing uncomfortably in the poisonous sentiments of these traumatized, terrified, and desperate people. The barrier of entry can be kind of high with a movie like this because of the dialogue being written to be period accurate, so it takes a bit of translating to fully understand what's being discussed. The commitment to historical accuracy pays off in spades with not only the dialogue, but the use of natural lighting in the cinematography, the costuming, and set decoration. So this helps the general atmosphere of the film and conveys the grim, cruel, and bleak reality within which this horror takes place. The film is well-paced but deliberate, choosing to linger on moments that let you wonder what is going through each person's head. Because the dialogue is period accurate, it's a welcome break to let the performances breathe through facial expressions and body language alone. The fear slowly builds up, swelling and gaining momentum with each misfortune that this family encounters. As the explanations for what is happening to them stray further away from the rational and the reasonable, the tensions rise within the family dynamics. This is where the best parts of the movie happen, where you can see the fragile system of decorum and good manners collapse under the fear of the unknown. People that consider themselves civilized as compared to the indigenous peoples of the First Nations of America tear themselves apart from the inside out within mere moments when they face the unknown. The barrier of religion that they believed provided them order and set them apart from the animals is the very rope by which they hang themselves with. Upon closer inspection, the family drama of grief and isolation has an ominous undercurrent of something rotten within each person on their own. Society always tends to treat women and young girls as objects upon which the ideas, desires, and concepts of the culture are projected. Femininity leads to being treated as a placeholder for the beholder's perception, instead of trying to understand the complexity and psychology of an individual. Just like the genre of horror, Thomasin sits in the fringe of society, doesn't find respectability and palatability associated with her. She comes into her own as a person, front and center of her own story, just like the heroine in a horror movie. One of the few genres where women are consistently represented as the main character, which provides the catharsis of the experience of watching a horror movie and the emotional journey of Thomasin. People can struggle with being objective about their perception or critique of a woman or womanhood because they're not neutral about the concept of femininity. The contempt and malice with which women and things pertaining to femininity are subjected to is not proportionate to their actual value. This is especially applicable to young women and adolescent girls. Navigating the pathway to adulthood is hard enough, what with all the hormones and the brain development, but adding in a minefield of societal expectations and the accompanying emotional damage is just cruel. Teenage girls are deemed by the culture at large to be vain and superficial, caring inordinately about their appearance and their clothes, instead of real things that are deep, man. They're materialistic and shallow and airheaded and flirtatious and don't read books or cultivate substantive personas. They're just sitting around while everyone else puts in the hard work, giggling and flitting about without a care and enjoying themselves. They're emotional and lack rationality and reason, and they just get so crazy with their drama and their hysteria. Their behavior is erratic and unpredictable, and they're difficult to control and contain within a specified role that they need to play for the benefit of others. They're regarded as possessed by something evil, something otherworldly. The horror of The Witch centers around girlhood and the transition to becoming a woman. If the culture prioritizes and values masculinity over femininity, then the presentation of feminine traits will mean an automatic designation of problematic always. In the culture of 17th century Puritanism, this was certainly the case. A strict adherence to modesty, obedience, and chastity was required by women, and any deviation from that didn't just mean any old flavor of ostracization. Witch trials and the hysteria surrounding the culture of Puritan fear about witchcraft is often viewed with a feminist lens, as an indictment on the perceived indiscretions of women behaving outside the strict code they were expected to adhere to. There are, of course, many factors to the swell of the witch hunt frenzy, including political machinations, but the primary driver seems to be religion. Around 78% of those accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials from 1692 to 1693 were women. Women who did not conform to the norms of Puritan society were more likely to be the target of an accusation, especially those who were unmarried or did not have children. Femininity and maturity have become a terrifying minefield to navigate for Thomason because of this. An accusation of witchcraft doesn't need any proof or evidence that can be scrutinized or held to standards of reason. It comes from a fervor so intense that it erases the humanity from the accuser's mind. There is no recourse to prove any innocence because that's not what's important. It is the eradication of individuals who pose a threat to the careful control maintained over the collective. Thomason gets accused of witchcraft by her own family after her brother Samuel goes missing. She hasn't really done anything that would be seen as subversive or disobeyed her parents in any meaningful way, but she still gets accused. She's also continually reminded by her religion and her prayers that wickedness is innate to her nature, as she's born into the curse of impurity and can only achieve purity through worship and obedience. Thomason recognizes that pleasing her parents involves giving up autonomy, something that she understands she must do but isn't willing to give up. There's a constant battle between control and calamity in the family, and within Thomason herself. The wilderness of the New World and the unfamiliarity are seen as an evil by William and Catherine because they cannot tame and control it. When Thomason herself begins to show any resistance to her parents, she is labeled wild and evil similarly. She has no other source of validation of her own self-worth as a person, or even a chance to form a sense of self that is independent from the influence of her family. Watching the events escalate into tragedy after tragedy, you begin to feel for Thomason. You feel her helplessness and fear and confusion as she struggles and fails to navigate through the catastrophes, tearing her family apart and away from her. She is running herself ragged trying to prove to her family that she is a good girl, a good person, and terrified of the consequences of not being redeemed and saved. She gets accused of witchcraft and being malevolent and wicked by everyone without getting the chance to exonerate herself. The word of her brother Jonas and her sister Mercy are taken immediately by her parents, simply because their infancy is associated with purity, and Thomason's sexual and mental maturity has made her morality spurious. There is a tendency to paint femininity as inherently evil because of the power it wields over others, through beauty and perceived traits of grace, delicate manners, and softness. The dichotomy of the Madonna or the whore reduces women and femininity to being judged for their morality, according to their sexuality and sexual drive. It's incredibly easy for people to ascribe negative qualities like being vain, shallow, unintelligent, and unkind to anyone presenting themselves as explicitly feminine. Coming of age into a transitionary period between girlhood and womanhood is enough for the people around you to lose trust in you and begin treating you as a criminal for a crime you did not even know you have committed. Even in a power structure where women do not hold positions of influence or authority, they are still determined to be the ones held responsible in sexual dynamics. Victims of sexual assault are immediately questioned on their behavior to determine if they are to blame for what has happened to them. These viewpoints are held in very high regard in the culture Thomason exists within. Combined with the fact that suffering is perceived as spiritual cleansing, Thomason is subjected to being punished because of her presumed inherent evil for becoming a woman. The satisfying conclusion with both fairy tales and horror stories is that good triumphs over evil. True horror comes from evil, malevolence that has no reason or rhyme, and often with abject cruelty. Horror stories are supposed to end with purity and goodness triumphing over evil because we need something to root and hope for. True horror here is the specter of the patriarchy that traps Thomason into a cage of silence, misery and isolation as she is deemed evil for committing the crime of coming into her own as a woman. Adolescence has made the world view Thomason as monstrous, and the world is not kind to monsters. Monsters are feared, so they get trapped, captured, and put away. The prison of expectations, a powerful one, and the struggle to be defined outside of it can consume people entirely. Thomason herself is bound by many prisons: her gender, her age, her family, her religion, and her lack of status within society to attain her desires. She's born into this prison, so she doesn't know much of life outside of it, but her imagination and curiosity surely has created an idea of what she would like to have in a life for herself. In the spirit of colonialism, Puritans were determined to remake the New World in their own image, and they grew resentful of the pushback from the wilderness of the new terrain that they encountered in the pursuit of domestication. This was an environment where there is no room for accommodating the differences of others or tolerance for variation. Prison of patriarchy figures very prominently in Thomason's life. I may be guessing, but being named Thomason indicates to me that her parents had their hearts set on having a boy as their eldest child. Colonies of the 17th century is steeped in the patriarchy. Male children receive the priority when it comes to care and attention. They receive power through inheritance of wealth and property. Women were not afforded the idea of economic freedom or choices in education and vocation. It followed very strict norms around their upbringing and manners. The head of the family makes decisions that the rest of the family have to unquestioningly obey, even if it's to the detriment of their well-being. This is the environment that Thomason exists within. She has to validate her existence and justify her presence in her family with the value that she brings as a worker on the farm, a daughter dispensing of her daily chores. She has to humanize herself by admitting out loud that she's full of sin, imperfect in thought and action at all times, begging for mercy from every higher power within her life. Thomason questions her ethics constantly and is viewed as wicked by her own mother simply because she's a teenage girl formulating her own sense of morality. Thomason is beset with the guilt of not meeting the expectations of her family as a dutiful daughter that dispenses of her responsibilities without complaint or comment. She tries her best to make sure both her parents view her as a valuable asset to the family by doing the labor around the farm. There is no indication that anyone in her family besides Caleb sees her for the person that she is. Thomason is viewed as a commodity rather than an individual. No one save for Caleb talks to her or jokes around or commiserates over the hardship they are facing, living in isolation. Parents even plan to give her away in service to another family in the plantation once they realize that their corn harvest is not healthy and can't be sold. Thomason has no one else in the family express their love for her, even though she's constantly trying to ingratiate herself with her parents. Her youngest siblings constantly antagonize her, fully well knowing that their mother is prone to fixating on Thomason's faults. There is a disturbing and poisonous jealousy that Catherine seems to feel regarding her daughter. Kate is clearly angry at William for dragging them away, not only from the safety of the established plantation and the society within, but also from their home in England where they didn't have to battle with their surroundings constantly. She takes out that frustration on Thomason simply because she is there. There is no option of really confronting William about his pride getting in the way of their family's well-being. Thomason gets chores piled on her, along with caregiving for the infant Samuel and overseeing the twins, taking care of the animals on the farm, and managing the house. There is no opportunity for her to reflect on herself, no quiet time for contemplation or cultivation of interests. She receives no encouragement in becoming her own person because it does not serve her family. Thomason is framed as a prisoner in her own home. They treat her like a criminal and she's constantly engaged in the process of defending herself to a system where she has already been proclaimed guilty without waiting to hear any evidence. She's sentenced to an imprisonment of being overlooked and belittled, the scapegoat for everything wrong with their life. Thomason is perceived as the vessel through which the evil intentions of the devil flow, and the cause of their family's loss of God's love. She has done no wrong of her own, but everything is pinned onto her since the disappearance of Samuel. She was still a child who was given the responsibility of giving care for her young infant brother. When something out of her control happened to Sam, she is vilified and frozen out of her family. She is being judged by people who have made mistakes even though they have presumably more life experience and knowledge than her. The role of her captors are played by her parents, who she is willing to support and please at all costs, but who in return see her as disposable. Her father let her take the blame for something he did and kept a secret from his wife in a society where lying is a sin, and he did so without considering what it might do to Thomason and her relationship with her mother. She is resentful of the fact that she's being held captive by her father, a man who she clearly believes doesn't know how to survive or fend for himself and his family. His pride and vanity and hypocrisies put their family in danger, yet somehow he is still the spiritual intellectual and moral leader of their group. Thomason has been sentenced to a prison in an unjust system, given to the care of people who preach against sinning, but do not themselves walk a righteous path according to their own rules. Imprisonment is a common theme in horror movies. The deranged antagonist has their grips on our brave heroes, having captured and chained them somewhere no one will find them. Thomason is a survivor of many horrors: isolation, repression, rejection, mania under the guise of piety, and death. Prison that she must break free from comes with a choice that most girls her age at the time were not given or even allowed to think about making. True tragedy of Thomason's story, however, is that she may have just traded one prison for another prison of blind belief, norms, and rigidity, and continually working to be seen as valuable in your community. Horror is sometimes abjectly cruel to women, much like the world can be. Death scenes can be dragged out to fixate upon the torture of female victims, who are often punished for transgressing societal norms of propriety, like having sex or taking drugs, just like the men do. It's difficult to justify a love of horror to people who don't enjoy the genre, because it's often overlooked as being dumb or lacking in artistic merit because of the way it treats women. Horror, though, is born of disobedience and counterculture, and has always had commentary about the human condition. As a genre, it openly confronts questions around sexuality, body image and body issues, gender, and physical autonomy. It pushes female protagonists to the center, unlike most genres with the exception of romance, perhaps. But unlike romance, horror can focus on making women the only main character, instead of having to share that spot with another male character. The female protagonist is often the final girl, someone you are invested in seeing come out on top and make it through relatively unharmed. The Witch provides an interesting interpretation of horror movie tropes and norms. We certainly watch Thomason suffer and agonize throughout the story, but we're not sure if she has been punished the same way female characters often are in horror movies. We fear for Thomason because we consider her vulnerable, but at the end we question her fragility and innocence. Instead of watching Thomason give way to despair and dejection, we watch her emerge a survivor where no one else could. The Witch is a celebration of the core concepts of horror. It celebrates femininity without trying to make it comfortable for the viewer, blending the concepts of a femme fatale, supernatural, and ostracization. It's a beautiful ode to the roots of the horror genre. It reminds the viewers that women in both horror and in reality have more dimensions to them than just being the victim. Maybe she was never the victim of the antagonist after all. Maybe she was the villain.
Good for